My name's Jen with Sloat Garden Center. I'm just going to talk for a little bit while people are logging on. I'm really excited to have Joan Pont back with us. Joan is from the California Native Plant Society, CNPS, and she's here to share with us tips on making our garden more nature compatible or really changing your aesthetic preference towards more of a sustainable garden. So she has really valuable information, and I'm looking forward to her presentation. You all should have received her PowerPoint slides in a reminder email that you would have received about an hour ago. And I also did some applicable resource handouts on that email as well. So let me know if you didn't receive that at all, and I can send a link to that. It's also on our website under outline, this week's webinar outline. I do want to say that I have a poll going on right now, and if you can hop over and fill out the questions, we do have some information that we want to gather before the presentation. And so if you could take a moment. Oh, I don't know if I started it. Hold on. Now it's launched. Okay. If you could take a moment and fill out the questions on the poll, that would be great. I do want to also share, I am super excited about our fall and winter lineup. I hope you're all checking out the classes. And this class is really launching it off. So honestly, you know, it's setting the bar for what's going on after it, and it's really exciting stuff, and I hope you all can join us for as many classes as possible. Our next class will be on September 15th with SF in Bloom. If you haven't checked that out at all yet or heard of them, they've actually, it's this duo that's gone viral. Like, they have a BuzzFeed video that last time I checked was over 25 million views. Yeah. And so now it's probably up to, like, I don't know, 40. But they basically, they're from San Francisco, and their whole initiative is to really make urban native gardens accessible, and also urban pollinator gardens. And their whole thing is that they go around like on their skateboards and, you know, put out native seed and stuff like that. It's really cool. And there's a lot of really good energy. So anyway, they're going to be with us at the next class on September 15th. And then we're going to go into fall is for planting. I mean, really, this is it. We're in it. This is the time that you want to be planting, thinking about planting, all this stuff. And so we'll have fall is for planting on September 18th. And that's with Suzanne and Charlotte from Our Water, Our World. And so they always have some really helpful tips to share. I do also want to say that if you have any questions, please feel free to feed them into the Q&A. I'll be going through them as Joan is doing her presentation, and we might take a couple questions here and there, but we're going to reserve the majority of the questions towards the end of the presentation. And also, I want to remind you that this is being recorded, and the recording should be available on Tuesday, whatever date that is, this next Tuesday. And we will have under the recording the link to her presentation as well. So you have all that information available. The recordings are really nice because you can, you know, go back and rewind and pause and screenshot or whatever. So it's a really good reference resource. And you can also look at the whole list of classes that we've done already, because there's a ton of information there. And, you know, we like that to make it as accessible as possible for you. Okay, so I'm going to check out the poll results really quick. 85% have attended a slope webinar before. Welcome back. So 15% first time. All right, cool. Welcome. Let's see. Majority of people are from Contra Costa, 45%. and then even split between Marin and San Francisco, and then 5% from Solano, 10% in California outside Bay. What level of gardener do you consider yourself? 71% intermediate, 14% beginner. I get really excited with beginner gardeners. You're like baby gardeners. I'm so happy you're here and willing to learn. And 14% are advanced, just here to geek out. So, okay, let's get to, Joan wanted to ask some questions. Are eucalyptus trees native to California? 95% said no. Okay. Are orange trees native to California? 73% said no. We're gonna hear about that one. And then what was the last one? Are there any native plants that provide delicious edible fruit? 91% said yes. Yay. Okay, good. All right. Well, I'm gonna turn it over to Joan. This is gonna last a little bit over a half hour. And thanks everyone for joining us. And thanks, Joan. I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Jen. I had a thought in the middle of the night, one night, a couple months ago, and I thought many people are very enthusiastic about native gardening, but what might be a stumbling block for people? And one of the stumbling blocks I came across when I'm proselytizing to my friends was a matter of taste and aesthetics. They were, to me, stuck in the past. So that's what I'm focusing on today. So you can open up any magazine and find a yard like this, which to me is a green desert. So it looks superficially coiffed and attractive in its own way, but there's no life, there's no birds, there's no bees, there's no biodiversity. I'm even suspecting that these might be actually plastic lawn inserts. But to me, this is old landscaping and not sustainable and definitely not native. So I'm thinking, let's just leave that aesthetic to the last generation and move on. It is more fun to me, and you can make your own choice, but to celebrate the biodiversity in your own garden. So here's the corner of my garden with an oak tree, a Quercus agrifolia, and under the oak trees, there's no lawn, but there's probably 6 or 7 different species of understory plants. And here I've got a blurry picture of taken with my phone of a Western bluebird in a nesting box. I get my directions for nesting box from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And these birds actually eat insects. They sit on a fence post and look down and jump down and capture their prey, and are stunningly blue and beautiful. So I'd rather see this out of my kitchen window than the former. Besides, we live in California. California is a state. We know the shape. It looks like a Christmas stocking, but it's also considered a floristic province and one of the 36 biodiversity hotspots in the entire world. It acts like an island. An island, like Hawaii, is surrounded by ocean. California has an ocean on one side, mountains on the other side, and desert at the toe. And so a lot of these plants and animals are isolated without a great deal of effort to get over the mountain or over the ocean or across the desert. And so you have a lot of diversity, kind of like our own Galapagos that Darwin explored when he sailed and wrote The Origin of Species. So we have a huge number of individual plant species, more than any other state in the nation. This is an article from the Santa Rosa newspaper, the Press Democrat, and it's talking about how our dudleyas are being poached and being sold worldwide, sort of like our own little, rhinoceros horn poaching. So we have to protect our native plants. So who am I to influence your taste? I'm here talking about what I passionately have learned and believe, and you can take it or leave it. But I'm also acknowledging that taste does change. I think if you inherited this beautiful chaise lounge, you might be leaving it off at the thrift center and maybe choosing this 1960 mid-century modern stunning chair. So tastes change. Here's a painting from the d'Orsay Museum. Here's a mom with a toddler and a son and a dog and a husband for a walk in the park with a silk gown. So it's what I put on every morning, I'm sure. I'm actually not sure I would change to Isaac Mizrahi's Diet 7-Up dress unless I look like Naomi Campbell or Kate Moss. But tastes definitely have changed in these 100 years. But garden tastes have changed also. So here's Versailles, here's where Louis XIV stood, and he wanted a garden where he could actually see every single person in his court and see who was speaking to whom and find out the scuttlebutt and the information about them. But to me, this is a green desert. It's a dead landscape. There's no birds, there's no bees, there's no flowers. If one plant died, it would look like your tooth was knocked out. It would really ruin the whole landscape. And it's essentially monoculture. Whereas this was my garden last spring. So the poppies, I did add poppy seeds, but all the lupins were extant, meaning not extinct, native annual lupins that came up with me just pulling out the weeds. I think this is a lot prettier. This is my taste. And this sort of garden actually takes a lot of work because you do have to pull out the alien non-native weeds to give your natives room. Rather than looking at Versailles as a fancy green desert, you might in your neighborhood have a more plebeian green desert, which is basically mowed weeds or mowed lawn. And I think a lot of people might prefer this sort of planting in other people's front garden and in your own front garden. So you don't have to just listen to me. And in your slide pack, you do have this reference list. So you can start at your local sloat nursery because they have a native plant section. And generally there's one native plant geek at every sloat nursery who can really delve into subtle details about plant choices. Sloat was generous enough to let me include another nursery, but it's in Southern California, Las Pilitas Nursery. So I'm not suggesting you drive down the coast unless you want to, but they also have an education program with great short videos and articles on gardening. CNPS, California Native Plant Society, was formed in 1965 when they realized that the native plants in California were, like the song, paved over like a parking lot, and are dedicated to the preservation and education about native plants. A spinoff, technically different, but related to CNPS, is a fabulous site called Cowscape, as in California landscaping, cowscape.org. And you can type in your address and find a list of plants that would be happy there based on your latitude, longitude, elevation, how cold it gets, how hot it gets, average rainfall, etc. And the list can be very long and overwhelming, and you can pare it down. Oh, I'm looking for a small tree. I'm looking for perennials, etc., etc. So you can really explore and learn by playing around with cowscape.org. I find reading a whole book sometimes gives a nice, great picture. So the two books that were written relatively recently that I'm recommending tonight or this morning is Nature's Best Hope by Doug Tallamy. Now, Doug is unfortunate because he lives on the East Coast. He doesn't happen to live in California, but he is a scholar. He's an entomologist and a professor, and really talks about the homegrown national park, where we're going to give our backyards to rewilding and native landscaping, and the whys of doing that, the biodiversity and sustainability. The hows can be really dug into by another book by Greg Rubin. He's in San Diego. He was an aerospace engineer for 8 years, and quit and got his landscape contracting license. And as he describes it, did what he really wanted to do, and that is plant native plants. They have a robust fire season, and he actually has published articles on firescaping and has very specific information on how he honed his native plant landscaping business to have higher success. So there are 2 books. There are many more, but these have caught my eye and I found very interesting over the last year of COVID reading. So why consider native plants, and why consider mimicking a native landscape? Well, the first and obvious reason is drought. We moved to Marin in 1983, and people were still talking about the multi-year drought from the 70s, where irrigation of the landscape was brought to a halt and lawns died, etc. And I looked up at Mount Tam, and I didn't see any sprinklers up there, but it was still covered with healthy looking plants. And I thought, maybe these natives have a secret that we need to learn about. Second is insects, as in to support them. There is something called the insect apocalypse, with a worldwide reduction in insects, which would have downstream damage in terms of pollination and feeding birds. Third, we live in houses or apartments. We have driveways. We get to places on freeways. We've taken a lot of land out of use, out of any sort of plant to plant in it. I mean, except for maybe the orchid on your bathroom shelf. And to mitigate that, to me, is to give back and consider embellishing your yard with a native landscape. And fourth, just like these magnificent manzanitas that Saxon Holt had photographed, they're pretty, and we like pretty. So imagine a garden that is self-sustaining, where you're not adding fertilizer and you're not even adding much water once established. So you water maybe once a month in the summer. If some friends come over, you might spritz the foliage to get a little dust off, but you really don't need to. And the leaves and the seed pods that do fall on the soil actually make a perfect duff or leaf litter, that top layer of soil. And you're not buying bags of mulch that are encased in forever plastic. Imagine a garden that is other sustaining, not just self-sustaining, but other sustaining. So you can wash your dishes at your kitchen window and do your own bird count. The environment might be so hospitable to native plants that there's a seed down there in the seed bank that sprouts that maybe hasn't been seen for years. And that caterpillars actually flourish. You want them nibbling on your leaves to provide food for chicks and have them grow up to be butterflies and moths. So real bird food. Many people put out bird feeders with seeds, and birds consider that a nice salad course. But imagine a clutch of eggs. When the eggs hatch, those chicks can't fly and need to grow and put on their flight feathers and then be able to escape predators. And they grow at the astonishing rate where they can take flight 14 days after hatching. Now, somebody actually watched a mother bird make 500 trips in one day to get enough caterpillars down their throats and other insects down their throats so they could have this astonishing growth rate. The father songbird made 200 trips. So let's go through a normal plant life cycle and see how that plays into a native landscape. Seeds, germination, seedlings, growth, flowers, fruit, and then new seeds for the next generation. Here's a picture from my garden, and it's Arctostaphylos sunset, which was a naturally found hybrid down in Monterey, which is very garden worthy and has flowers in February. The flowers are downward facing and bell-shaped because February, hopefully, we have rain, and these flowers will protect the pollen so it doesn't get washed away. So the Arctostaphylos are in the same plant family as rhododendrons. Rhododendrons bloom later when there's less rain. So their flowers can be open and be vulnerable to a late rainstorm, but have a different shape depending on the season that they flower. So that was very good design work, I think, on the Arctostaphylos. The more common name for Arctostaphylos is Manzanita. Technically, Manzanita is one species of Arctostaphylos. There are other species, from low-growing ground covers to really tall shrubs that are actually very appropriate as small trees in the small garden. They are stunning. So seeds. Some plants will create 1 million seeds to ensure its reproduction once. Most seeds do not mature to grow to mature plants. I guess this seed won't get eaten, but many of the others will. So if you were an MBA graduate and you had a client, you said, oh, let's make 1 million cell phones and sell one, I don't think you would have very many clients. So would you consider making 1 million seeds to reproduce yourself once a mistake? Actually, I don't think so, because it's yet another example that plants make food for absolutely everybody else. Plants are the only ones that do photosynthesis. Take carbon dioxide from the air, water from the ground, up their roots, up the xylem, put it together with sunlight, make a sugar, join the sugars together to make starches that we eat, join the sugars together in another way to make cellulose where we build our houses or have our clothing, and they can share their leaves, but they can also share their seeds. And they are the food producers for absolutely everybody else. Seeds are just another form of food and to reproduce themselves. Seeds often have to disperse. They can't land right underneath the parent tree. And if you ever want to go down the rabbit hole of seed dispersal, you can get some amazing art shots. Here's the milkweeds that have a dandelion-like appendage so they can float away. There's a lot of different mechanisms of seed dispersal. So the microphotographers in the audience, that might be fun to share your pictures too. Germination. If you buy a pack of vegetable seeds, you will often see a guaranteed rate of germination, which exceeds 90%. But some native plants may have a germination rate in that first year of 5%. So is this another example of the MBA graduate saying, oh, why don't we just have 5% of our cell phones work and 95% not work and just be on the shelf for a while? I don't consider it a mistake, although the consultant might, because sequential germination gives a more likely success in the spring. Imagine the last spring with that paltry rainfall, the lupins that sprouted really had a tough time in the summer. But the seeds that are in the soil, that are in the seed bank, hopefully next year or the year after that, are going to have a much more robust rainy season and be able to survive that first summer without the dry season, without any summer rains. So who knows what happens to the seeds? They could get eaten by birds, other munchers, drought, flood, frost, heat waves. So you want sequential germination, and you want a seed bank that actually has seeds in it for several years and not all germinate the first season and potentially be wiped out. So there's some subtle things that native plants do that are actually pretty wise when you look at that. So germination. Seeds have an embryonic plant, little root, little stem, little leaves, little tiny, and that other part of the seed is called endosperm. And you might have eaten endosperm for breakfast. If you had a piece of toast, the white part of the wheat seed is ground into flour to be made into toast. If you had a bowl of oatmeal, the large majority of the oatmeal that you cooked is endosperm. So the seed has the embryonic plant plus endosperm. So when the seed is signaled to germinate, contact with soil, moisture, cold or hot or whatever signal that particular plant needs to germinate, it has to grow the roots down, 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 push the stem up out of the soil, create the two leaves, and only until that leaf is out in the sun, that leaf is its solar panel to receive light and do photosynthesis and make its own food. Only then is the plant on its own, an autotroph, make its own growth. And all the energy required for that growth until that moment is from the endosperm. So you can look at a seed differently, I think. So growth in a natural garden, in a native garden, we're going to accept funny looking leaves. There's a publication called Bay Nature. I don't know if anyone's read it, but it's a kick and fabulous. And the articles are really short. And they had a recent article on oak galls, which is rather amazing. You have a wasp lay an egg in a part of an oak. This one happens to be on a leaf, others are on a stem, and it inspires the oak tree to make these bizarre growths around it so the wasp can grow predator free and escape. And the oak tree tolerates it, no apparent harm to the oak. And the wasp has this castle to live in. So it is very interesting at a basic science level of inspiring these bizarre growths, and at an acceptance level to accept these art forms on your tree. Holes in leaves are okay. This is my pear tree. So not all my plants are native. This is non-native, but it has a beautiful hole in it carved out by someone. I don't think it was a snail. Snails generally eat from the edge because they have a radula and they go in from the edge. And it might have been carved out by a native bee. So there are European honeybees, which to the native bee people are considered managed livestock. We have 1,600 species, 1,600 species of native bees. 70% are ground nesting and 30% are cavity nesting. Only the carpenter bees dig holes in wood. All the other bees use hollow stems. So they will drill a hole in a stem. The female bee will collect pollen, stick it together with nectar, and make a loaf called a pollen loaf. Stick it in the stem, lay a single egg on it, put a room divider up, another pollen loaf, another egg, another room divider. The larvae will grow and pupate and mature over 11 months. They will emerge either from the ground or the stem as a mature bee, fly around for a month, and go through the next life cycle. So I like to peer through holes in leaves. I accept holes in leaves and actually am delighted to see them because I know that I've got some native bees in the garden. I can also look at the bees. So other part of growth is leaf fall. The deciduous plants are going to be dropping all their leaves relatively at one time. The evergreen trees and shrubs are going to drop their leaves, but more sequentially. And those leaves are a lot tougher, a lot thicker. They take a lot more time to decompose. So they make a long lasting duff or leaf litter. So the soil experts consider the top layer of soil, the litter layer, and litter usually is bad, like, a Starbucks cup out the car window, but this is leaf litter, or the O horizon, O for organic, as opposed to meaning derived from a living organism, as opposed to the little particles of soil that is mineral that's derived from crushed rock. And then the further down you go, so the top layer is recognizable leaves, twigs, seed pods, etc. And the further down you go, the more decomposed it is from our decomposers, and it becomes more like mature compost. So if you find fungi on your forest floor, be very happy that you've got a compatible garden with your decomposers. Obviously, mushrooms, mycorrhizal, saprophytic, there's a lot of mushroom talk, and that's really fun to explore as well. So don't blow away your leaves, don't rake up your leaves, leave the leaves. That's why they're called leaves. Within that O layer, you can have some surprises. So here's an oak seedling. So oaks from locally collected acorns have the best root system and are adapted to your area. So even if you get a Quercus agrifolia, a coast live oak, if it's from inland area and you're coastal, or it's coastal and you're inland, it's not going to be that happy. If you walk around your neighborhood and pocket some acorns, if you're feeling guilty, you can get the ones from the street gutter that didn't get driven over by a car anyway, and plant those. You're going to be propagating a local oak. There's a lot of genetic diversity even within one species. And what's interesting is I had an oak seedling, not this one, but another one. And I was like, oh, it's in a perfect location. I really want it to grow. And I gave it some supplemental water and it instantly died. So my observation is if it's within the root zone of another plant beyond the drip line, because the root zone can go beyond the drip line, it's very happy and happier without summer water. So some native plants are very sensitive to summer irrigation, and you'll actually kill them with summer irrigation. It takes a while for the roots to be established, but then they take off. So my son played soccer, when he was 5 or 6, and I was sticking acorns in my pocket and planting them. And when he went to college at the regular age of 18, didn't take 15 break years, those oak trees were taller than the house. So you don't have to wait to the next generation, although they'll have prettier oak trees if you plant them now. So A or B. So here is a lawn, which is a little bit funny because most people say they are growing a lawn for playing croquet or playing and stuff like that. So this particular lawn has a sign that you can't even walk on it. And you have trees in the lawn, and the lawnmower is going right under the trees. So it is now recommended not to mow under trees for a million reasons. Basically, a million organisms are down there. So caterpillars can eat the leaves. They're not going to defoliate your tree. And actually, a tree can tolerate a single defoliation if they get out of hand, but they're going to eat the leaves. And then when they go to pupate, when they form their chrysalis and they're completely vulnerable, they will drop to the ground and hide there before emerging. So you want your leaf litter as a protected zone. Your leaf litter also holds in the leaves that fall down to make new soil. The mowers and leaf blowers contribute a lot to CO2 in the atmosphere and global warming, and people are moving away from lawns. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal about ditching your lawn. I'm like, whoa, that's even reaching the Wall Street Journal audience. I've got this gorgeous, this is from my garden, Douglas iris. Our iris, native irises are beardless. They know how to shave under my oaks in February. They're pretty stunning. So growth, sometimes there's too much growth, and I'm going to call that enemy escape. Not me, but a lot of people are calling it enemy escape. So why do non-native plants grow without apparent limits? So we're going to call this enemy escape. Generally, they are imported from Europe or Asia or Africa or Australia without their natural controls. So they contribute to a green desert. The plant is green, but nobody is eating them. There's a weed, an invasive weed called the common tansy from Europe. And entomologists have found 169 herbaceous insects eat that plant in Europe, 169, and here none. So you might think, wow, my plant's not going to get eaten. I'm going to grow it. But it's not providing food for insects that are pollinators and insects that are food for birds. Oh, this is a reminder that eucalyptus trees do drop their branches. So once your plant is growing, you might notice some flowers. And the beautiful flowers basically are enticing pollinators to transfer pollen from one plant to another plant. So here's a columbine, and these are nectaries for the hummingbird to slurp up. And nectar actually can have different thicknesses depending who the audience is, depending on who it's made for. So just like your barista might know your favorite drink, the flowers would know thinner nectar for bees because they have smaller little straws to soak it up with, and thicker nectar for hummingbirds because they're bigger and a lot heavier and need a lot more calories. I mean, they're beating their wings 70 times a second. That was kind of fun to learn. The whole point of pollination is to mix up the genes, have half the genes from one flower or one plant and half from another, just like you are different from your parents, and you might be really happy about some of those attributes, and your children are different from you, you might be really happy about avoiding some of your attributes. The next generation might produce a plant that's more tolerant to drought, disease, or have bigger, prettier flowers, more delicious fruit, who knows? But the genetic diversity of seeds is really important. flowers. So many would consider these Clarkias beautiful cut flowers, and they actually are in the flower industry. This is named after Lewis and Clark, who explored America in 1803 with support of friends. I consider this a bouquet as well. These are the same Clarkias, but they've gone to maturity and have these perfect little vases, these little seed packs, which the birds can gather their seeds from. I can collect some and store them away to set out in November for more seeds. So sometimes seed capsules can be as intriguing as the actual flowers. So you want flowers to be blooming absolutely every single month of the year, because you go to the grocery store every single month of the year to get food. The little critters in your garden need pollen and nectar, fruit and seeds every month of the year. So here's a great picture of the coyote brush. And we talked about cross-pollination, pollen going from one flower to another flower. So a lot of flowers have both stamens and pistils. They can actually self-pollinate or pollinate within the same plant. The coyote brush guarantees cross-pollination. Here's a male plant, a staminate plant, and a female plant. So these flowers only make pollen. These flowers only make seeds. They do provide pollen and nectar in the fall, like a chrysanthemum. It's a fall flowering plant. When these seeds are fully mature, those white plumes spread out and then they blow away like dandelions. And that's how it got the nickname, or the common name, coyote brush, because it looked like a shaggy coyote. But you can consider coyote brush for your fall bloomers and the manzanita and ceanothus as shrubs or subshrubs or large shrubs for your winter and spring bloomers, and then many, many choices for your summer and fall bloomers. Fruit. So some seeds are encased by fruit to have larger animals carry it away and have seed dispersal. And you probably know that if you eat a raspberry in someone's garden, it's going to be more delicious than a raspberry that was flown in an airplane from, say, Chile. So we have the very short shelf life soft berries, and the native berries that are found here in Marin and in the East Bay can, some of them are edible by people and super delicious, but no shelf life. Eat them out in your yard. Serviceberry, thimbleberry, salmonberry. We have native blackberries, beautiful huckleberries, and a native grape, Vitis californica, which has red leaves in the fall and can be really, really stunning in a landscape setting. It's covering about 30 feet of my fence in the entry. There are other berries which are a lot more durable. They last on the trees or shrubs for months, and the birds can nibble away for a long period of time. Toyon is a great shrub and has red berries. Snowberry, pictured here, I took this picture yesterday, have shiny white berries, and it's really stunning in the landscape. And I've got an Arctostaphylos in the background to show off the white a little bit more. We have an evergreen plum that's native called Prunus ilicifolia, which is a gorgeous shrub. And these berries can stay on the plant for months, and they actually have their own preservative that the birds tolerate. So planning, I'm a little loose with my planning. I kind of let the plants tell me where they want to go. The basic grid is sun, shade, dry, moist. So sun, plants that want or need 6 hours of sun a day or more. Shade, deep shade, speckled shade. Dry, plants that tolerate or require a period of dry soil between waterings, or moist, plants that grew up on a riverbank. But beyond that, there's some microscopic differences in your garden that you may not even recognize. And you can plant 3 plants. 2 of them are growing great like gangbusters, and 1 is suffering. So try another plant in that area and move the plant that's suffering to the area where they're really, really happy. This is an Epilobium canum, California fuchsia, used to be called Zauschneria. And this was planted as a 4-inch pot in a gravel walkway. I gave it some supplemental water the first summer. I haven't watered it in 4 years, and it's sending out runners to other areas in the garden. And wherever it sends out a runner, I'm figuring that's where it wants to grow, that's fine with me. So the big changes, the philosophical changes that I've embraced, and hopefully some of you will too, is rejoice when you see nibble marks on leaves and petals. You are personally mitigating the insect apocalypse. Create insect and bird habitats. You can learn from the Audubon Society or Xerces about what birds and bees like in your garden. So when I have a cover crop of fava beans, and I pile up those hollow stems in a brush pile, and hopefully the native cavity nesting native bees will provide them habitable. Provide undergrowth under your trees and don't mow under your trees. Let the flowers stay in your garden until it's fully mature, until it's a seed and a fruit, and choose your plants so that you've got flowers every month of the year. Let the leaves stay in your yard. Let them fall down where they will. I guess you can brush them off your walkways, but that's about it. And it's going to be a hospitable duff for insects and further decompose to make refreshed soil. Native plants have survived record-breaking droughts in the past, and once established, will survive droughts in your garden too. And sorry, Sloat, there is a budget option, and that is to collect acorns from friends and neighbors and plant oak trees. It's a keystone plant that supports hundreds of species of birds and insects. So thank you for listening, and let's see if there's any questions.
Wow, that was super amazing. I always learn so much from you. So yeah, I mean, I just want to echo what you're saying, and I think it's really great how you're putting it. You know, I think a lot of us, when we see imperfections in the garden, we're like super quick to want to like spray it or whatever, remove it or whatever. And so I think what you're really talking to is very valuable in the sense that you're seeing the ecology, you're seeing the community, and it's all important and it's all valuable. I always tell this story about a friend of mine in Santa Rosa who's got a garden of fruit trees and roses, which are traditionally the most heavily sprayed things in the garden. And several years ago, he opted to stop using pesticides and whatnot. And in that, even just in that scenario, it took a couple of years, but the community came and it balanced itself out, and a lot of, you know, stuff that you would otherwise spray for worked itself out with it. So I really like that message, and that's super cool. We do have some questions. I know this is kind of its own topic, but and are there natives that you recommend that are less fire prone for if we're thinking about fire?
So I'll refer you to Greg Rubin's book, and I think a lot of the counties have websites with fire information as well. So any plant will burn if there's a firewall coming at it. But for fire protection, they talk about catching embers, because embers can go in the wind 10 miles. And so a lightly irrigated landscape, so native plants typically use about a third of the water of a conventional landscape. And so you can have a healthy green plant that's going to catch an ember that can be spot put out before it gets to your house. Greg has a presentation that includes a house that was on a knoll, and whosever house it was, he was determined not to have his house burned. So he cut down every single plant on the knoll. It was like the house was on top of a bowling ball. And he, being a retired aerospace engineer, the house burned down, demonstrated that there was completely uninterrupted laminar flow coming up that hillside with all the embers going to the house. There's many, many things you can do to house new building codes in terms of fire prevention of the eaves and of the vents and stuff like that. So the house itself can be more fireproof, but catching embers is the key to a landscape that can be mitigating fire risk.
Yeah, and I've also heard pruning too. Like for example, Baccharis is an incredibly valuable plant in the landscape, and then it was on the fire list for a while, and then they ended up, the fire people and the native plant people worked it out, and the fire people were like, okay, it's all right if you keep it pruned. So just pay attention to that too.
Right. I mean, Greg actually thinks that junipers are very fire prone, so they're like candles. But he basically says many of the other plants lightly irrigated, so that they're green, can be fire mitigating by catching embers. But the juniper right next to your house, I would go out right now with a saw and cut it down.
Yeah, definitely. This is a good question. So a question about which leaves to leave on the ground and which to rake up, because it is true, we have had speakers in the past, for example, if you have like roses or fruit trees, you could spread disease if you keep the leaves on the ground. So do you have a general sort of like, how do you figure which ones to leave and which ones to keep on the ground?
So of all my natives, I leave all the leaves on the ground. I mean, I may push them off a walkway, so I don't slip when it gets wet, but I push them off to the garden. In terms of disease mitigation in say a vineyard setting, so they actually don't want mummified fruit, and some fungus spores can overwinter and stuff like that. So I guess for food production, there would be some leaves that you would remove, and I would not be an expert in that, so I would defer to those experts.
Yeah, that makes sense. So most of the native plants, you could probably leave the leaves. And then the more ornamental stuff, that's where you get into mildews and whatnot that you can spread around. Yeah. So somebody's asking about moles. I mean, yeah, we're talking about community and stuff, but I mean, we've got a mole question, we've got a deer question. I mean, there are.
Well, moles are interesting. So moles and gophers are different. Moles are carnivores. They eat insects. So they make the tunnels that are right under the surface, kind of like the cartoon where the mole is underground and you can see the surface buckle. And they don't generally harm plants. Gophers, pocket gophers, they can dig down 6 feet and they eat your plants. I mean, if you're growing vegetables and you don't have them in raised beds with gopher wire or gopher cages, goodbye, because what you want to eat, they want to eat. And they will munch away the roots and pull down a huge, say, artichoke plant. It'll be out, 2 feet by 2 feet one day, and I'll come back the next day and I see the tip of one little leaf in the hole. So trapping gophers with cinch traps, and then tossing them out so your turkey vultures or whatever. So there's a neighbor of mine that catches gophers, and a red shouldered hawk has caught onto it. So he will toss them in the air and the red-shouldered hawk will swoop down and catch.
Whoa.
And it's a wild hawk. It's not like a falconer, but he knows that Roy is out there catching his gophers for him. He's like, oh, thank you. Yeah. Deer, I fenced my backyard in Mill Valley. I did plant trees beyond my fence in an open area after pulling out the French broom. And I did put deer fences around each seedling. I actually didn't water on that hillside, and those trees are at least 20 feet tall now. But I did put deer fencing. I put in T-posts and then wire fencing. So if you have 20 feet of wire fencing, that'll make a 6-foot circle, which will be big enough for the shrub to get up above nose height. Once they're above deer nose height, then they can grow out and you can take down the fence or use the fence for another seedling. I haven't found any other way. Deers don't tend to eat grasses. We have 300 species of native bunch grasses. So if you do have an entry that's not fenced, you can have an assemblage of native grasses and the deer will not eat them. They will eat salvias, even though they're deer resistant, but when it gets hungry, they'll eat them, but they'll eat them less vigorously. So trees above nose height and native grasses, bunch grasses would be my suggestion for deers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't trust the deer one bit. So to your point, even if it's considered deer resistant, you know, even if it's a new baby plant, they're gonna come try it out, and so yeah, just giving it that protection while it's getting established is pretty important. I have a question for my own garden. I'm actually gonna, because I'm inspired by people like you, I'm gonna pull out like 25 roses this year and convert a ton of it to native gardening. And I'm kind of impatient with seeds, to be honest. And I haven't had a ton of success with seeds because I think a lot are being eaten. And so, do you have like, I mean, when you with your garden, do you kind of do like half seed, half starts or something like that? Or
Oh,
what would
yeah.
you, yeah.
So I generally get either 4-inch or 1 gallon. I rarely go bigger than a 1 gallon. I really like 1 gallon plants. So for woody shrubs and ground cover, stuff like that, have a good start and use the 1 gallon plants. Greg Rubin actually has very specific information in Las Piladas Nursery on planting native plants. So you actually dig the hole that's the depth of the 1 gallon plant. So the crown is at the soil depth. It can be wider, but no deeper. If you dig the hole deeper and backfill, that's softer, and then the plant will sink and have the crown low and can have crown. So you have a very shallow hole. I mean, because a 1 gallon plant is going to be an inch lower than the can. So it's not very deep. And what he suggests is you dig the hole, you fill it up with water, let it drain, fill it up with water, let it drain, fill it up with water, let it drain. So you actually totally saturate that area. Actually, that's in the Marin, the water district of Marin directions too. So you really saturate that area with water, and then you plant the plant and water it. Because if you just put it in and water it, the surrounding dry ground will suck away all that water, and that plant will be stressed at transplanting. You have much higher success if you really invest in that, pre-watering that one area. So 1 gallons are it. So in Cowscape, you can get a list of shrubs. Do you want it 4 feet tall? Do you want it 3 feet tall? You want the ultimate size of the plant to be appropriate for your yard, because you really don't want to prune. You want the plant to be a full size so that it is making the flowers and the fruit and stuff like that. If it's 6 feet and you only want it 4 feet, you're always chopping off the new growth and where the flowers are going to be. So really pay attention to the ultimate size and make it appropriate for your garden. So, you know, bigger guys in the back, littler guys in the front. If you have a place where people are constantly cutting the corner, and like you're going to the mailbox and you're constantly breaking branches, that's where to put a little assemblage of your native bunch grasses, because they can take the abuse, they can take the mail person, you know, cutting the corner and dropping something off at your front door. And oh, Winston, that's my dog. So play around with it, but there's appropriate plants for different areas. But yeah, 1 gallon is key. Very helpful.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm really excited. I'm trying to sort of plan it out, you know, in the next couple of weeks in my mind. And I do want to echo that Cowscape website is incredible. So anybody who hasn't checked it out, definitely check it out. Do the advanced filter too. And even though I'm a designer myself, I do go to they have a whole design thing. So you can like put in your space and they will generate a plan for your like it's incredible for your garden using native plants. So that's really cool.
We attended that webinar together on the
That's right.
Cowscape, yeah. And
no, I love it.
It was very interesting.
Super cool. Tons of good information. I've been using it ever since.
Doug Talamy, the author of Nature's Best Hope, he gave a presentation for Marin Art and Garden Center. And he said, California, you guys have this site called Cowscape. No other state has it. No, it doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. It's a pure California invention, and it's such a great tool.
Wow. Yeah, such a great resource. Okay, let's see, a couple more questions. I think you've really covered this well. Do the male and female coyote brush, are they on the same plant, or do you have to plant two plants, a male and a female?
Right. So there's flowers that have both parts, your rose or whatever. Then when they're separated, there's monoecious plants and dioecious plants. One house or two houses. So an oak will have your catkins, your flowers that produce pollen, and your flowers that produce the acorn on the same tree. Wind pollinated, and it's cross pollinated between flowers, or if there's a wind, between trees. Coyote brush is dioecious, just like a kiwi farmer. A kiwi farmer will plant one male plant and 5 female plants. And the male plant will just provide pollen to the 5 female plants. The 6th one will be too far away. He's going to have another male plant. So when you are hiking around and you're noticing coyote brush in the wild, you'll see some plants that stay tidy and others that are the shaggy white ones. So you've got the male and the female. Typically in the garden center, they're going to sell the male plants because they're more traditionally tidy. But if you collect seeds, again, from a neighbor, something like that, or you have them growing naturally in your yard, you're going to get both. So you need both for reproduction. Yes. Dioecious, 2 houses. Oh, another example of monoecious, 1 house, are pumpkins and squashes. I never could understand how you could have stuffed squash blossoms in the farmer's market in the summer and squash in the fall. I mean, if you picked all the flowers, how do you get a squash? That's because there's boy flowers and girl flowers. You can pick most of the boy flowers and stuff it with herb ricotta cheese and serve that for dinner. And then the girl flowers are going to make the squash for the fall. So that's monoecious, 1 house. Yeah. Like, who knew? Well, squash farmers knew. I didn't know.
This is a good question. I think it kind of goes back to how you divide up your garden in terms of sun and water, but somebody is asking about if you do have a mixture of natives with non-natives, how do you water it, basically?
Yeah. So yeah, most garden plans now talk about hydrozones. So you've got your plants like flannel bush, which will just keel over dead if you give it summer irrigation. Like, once established, it does not want to be watered artificially. Or your mature oak trees, like, don't water it. Just, that's going to be your area where there's no water. For plants that are tolerant to irrigation, but don't need a lot of water, whether they be native or exotic, so you're going to plant those together. And then maybe next to your bird fountain or pond, you're going to have a little tiny zone that's very, very moist, and you can grow your yerba buena, that mint that is really fantastically smelling, and you can make it into a tea, or your other moisture loving plants might be in a very, very small area. And sometimes it's experimentation, where you're going to move a plant 2 feet away because it's getting too much water. And even within the zone, there's going to be some tolerance or some intolerance. But yeah, so the same water requirement, whether it's native or non-native, they can be planted in the same hydrozone.
Yeah, and it's just good to bring up, like Joan said before. I mean, typically, so all plants will have on the description, it'll say full sun or part shade. And typically we think of full sun as 5 to 6 hours or more. And kind of a general rule of thumb is if it just says full sun on the can, it needs that amount of sun. And
right. If you plant it under a tree, it'll get all leggy and it'll send these long branches out. It's like, where's the sun? It'll move over. So yeah.
Yeah. And same with, water. It should say on the can. And there's a lot of drought tolerant, like lavender and, stuff like that. You can definitely thyme that you can mix in with native plants. So just pay attention to the sun exposure and the water, like Joan is saying. So, well, I hope everybody's inspired to go plant your native friendly garden and your pollinator friendly garden. This has been incredible. information, and I'm certainly inspired. It's adding to my whole like brain like spin that I'm doing right now as I'm planning my garden. And so I really appreciate all of your info and inspiration. I do want to remind everyone that this is being recorded, and it will be available on our website. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you would get a notification once it's uploaded, but it should be available on Tuesday, and we will have a link to Joan's slides for her presentation underneath that. And I hope you join us for our next class on Wednesday for urban native and pollinator gardens. And I hope everybody has a great Saturday. It's a beautiful day out, so get outside and enjoy it. Thanks so much for joining us. Thank you, Joan. Really appreciate it.
Okay.